In my Puyo Pop Fever video, I said I was thinking about doing some more retrospective videos on other Puyo Puyo games, one of those being Puyo Puyon. So, I think it's about time to talk about it. Puyo Puyon is a particularly interesting Puyo game. It was released near the end of Compile's tenure with the Puyo Puyo franchise. It introduced new gameplay elements that would never return in any future installments, and it brought in new characters and concepts which never got the opportunity to fully integrate themselves into the Puyo Puyo mythos. And with that in mind, it is true to say that this game suffered a troubled development cycle. But what exactly happened? Let's dive in. The development history for this game is a bit scattered, so forgive me if this section ends up being a little less than up to date, if more information about this game's development cycle comes forward. But anyways, Puyo Puyon first released for the Sega Dreamcast on March 4th, 1999, with N64 and PS1 ports coming later that year, and a Game Boy Color version releasing in 2000. The first three versions are essentially the same game with minor changes between systems, while the Game Boy Color version is a full-on remake made to suit the handheld. The console version began development immediately after the completion of Puyo Puyo Sun, and before release was even displayed at Tokyo Game Show. However, the game had some sort of trouble while being developed, as evidenced by cut playable characters who were reduced to cameo roles in the final game, but I'll get to that all later. The Game Boy Color version was handled by a different team and is pretty unique in a lot of ways, which I will cover as this video continues, but we do have a lot more specific details about the planned content that was left on the cutting room floor. This includes a story and scenario that differs greatly in scope to what the console version presents, involving Carbuncle being used by Satan to undo a floating timeline time loop that was established in the true Mado Monogatari light novels. The story in the final game, while not a complete carbon copy, is largely identical to the console version's plot. The cutscenes in this version were to originally be of a more serious nature, but were changed to be more comical and lighthearted, similar to the ones in Puyo Puyo Sun, due to negative feedback from the rest of the staff. The game's producer also planned on many additional characters being added to the game, in addition to all the characters present in the console version, and reportedly had pixel art created for almost all of these. This included every character from Puyo Puyo 2, Sun, Doppelganger Shezo from Waku Waku Puyo Puyo Dungeon, Black Kikimora, and Venerus and Satani from Arl's Adventure, Magical Jewels. One additional character planned was Dark Witch from the Disc Station game, Comet Summoner, who would appear replacing Witch in repeat playthroughs, but the idea was dropped after it was deemed too serious. In the lead up to the game's release, some small albeit notable effort was done to promote the game. In particular, a series of articles called Chico's Diary, available on Compile's website. Chico was one of the new characters introduced into this game. She was a shrine maiden in training, with abilities designed around the Earth's elements. The other new characters to this game include Archan, a character who had previously appeared in a Mado game called Daimado Senryaku Monogatari, and Pierrot, a mysterious clown a part of the Puyo Puyo Circus, the main setting of the game. Speaking of the setting, I think it's time I go over this game's story. The story begins with Satan poking around in a castle. He discovers a strange book, it starts acting crazy, and then the scene ends. We then go to Arl, where the game establishes she enjoys her life with her pet and best friend, Carbuncle. A circus happens to be coming through town, with many of her previous opponents as the performers. Curious, Arl and Carbuncle go to see a performance at the circus, and enjoy it thoroughly. Towards the end though, a performer that looks a lot like Satan asks for someone to be in a magic display where they'll make an audience member disappear. He of course picks Carbuncle, who goes inside the box and disappears, all to the amazement of Arl and the rest of the audience. The show ends and everyone leaves for home, but Arl notices Carbuncle hasn't returned. With this, she asks around the circus staff to see if they've seen where Carbuncle had ended up, and this is where the game begins. Arl encounters a variety of opponents, mostly all characters from the previously released Puyo Puyo Sun. Some however were returning after being absent from that game, namely Penotti and Dragon, as well as Cerilli, this being her first appearance where she actually had a name. In Puyo Puyo 2, she was only called Scaly Fish Person. Some of the characters join Arul during her journey, and are present for the various shenanigans she encounters. Such amusing things happen, like Cirilli friendzoning Skatadara, and Harpy annoying everyone. Eventually, you get up to Satan, where it's obvious he's under some sort of control by someone else. After battling him, he wishes you luck for what you encounter next. Pierrot's true identity is revealed. It's...
I have a long-lost twin sister? I'm not your sister!
a character called Doppelganger Arul. She was the one responsible for kidnapping Carbuncle this whole time. You defeat her, Carbuncle just shows back up, and then the game ends. Okay. That was strangely anticlimactic. This game set up some crazy and interesting lore and world building, and yet the story is dissonantly simple. This I feel goes without saying, but it's very clear that on the surface, the more detailed art style of this game implies that the narrative will be a little more serious than what's presented in previous Puyo Puyo entries. And yet, that's not really the case at all. On that note, I want to get out of the way that regardless of that yeah, the art in this game is fantastic, and the redesigns the characters sport all look great. Even most of the pixel art in the Game Boy Color version looks pretty good. But back to the story, it just feels like there's so many unanswered questions. What's up with Doppelganger Arul? Why exactly does she wear that costume until the very end of the game? Where does she even go after being defeated? There's a lot of questions, and to add to this, I need to go over the differences in the story from the Game Boy Color version. While this version of the game unfortunately has yet to receive a fan translation patch, it does thankfully have a video translation online of its story mode courtesy of Precise Museum, which I'll be using for footage here. Anyway, the beginning of the story is largely the same. Arul and Carbuncle go to see the circus, and Carbuncle goes missing while there, with the ringmaster looking awfully suspicious. Arul immediately encounters Pierrot, who begs Arul to battle, and doesn't tell her anything about what happened to Carbuncle, except to talk to the ringmaster. Arul then proceeds to look for where he might be, encountering the same lineup of opponents as the console version. Eventually, Arul fights Rulu, who reveals to Arul that Satan is the ringmaster, much to Arul's shock. Really? Arul couldn't tell that was him earlier? Upon defeating Satan, he warps both Arul and Carbuncle to where Pierrot is waiting. Pierrot reveals herself to be Doppelganger Arul and says she'll take over Arul's life to be the real Arul and will trap her here alone, stuck doing jigsaw puzzles. They fight, of course, Arul triumphs her, and Arul says something about no one ever being able to replace someone. She asks for where Carbuncle is, and Doppelganger Arul responds by warping Arul away, and threatens Arul will see her again someday, but as no one but me. Arul then regains consciousness and is shown to be back at the Puyo Puyo circus once more, where the magic trick plays out much like it did at the start of the game, but Carbuncle actually is back, and they can now go home to eat curry. Okay, so that was strangely even more anticlimactic. I do appreciate that they attempted to make Doppelganger Arul's presence a little more of a threat to Arul, but that of course was never followed up on in any Puyo Puyo game after this, so oh well. This does bring me to my point I alluded to in the intro about how, as this was Compile's last mainline Puyo Puyo game before they lost the franchise to Sega, it is true that the stuff introduced in this game never really got to be followed up on. We never got to see Doppelganger Arul return as an antagonist or anything, nor did we really get to see Chico get some spotlight. And that's a shame, honestly. I wish we could have gotten a Mado Monogatari game corresponding with Puyo Puyon, like how Mado Saturn corresponds with Puyo Puyo Sun. I'm starting to get off topic now, so let me move on to discussing how Puyo Puyon is animated. While I did praise this game's art earlier, I have to say, the way the art is animated is a sheer downgrade, which is a shame to say, because the animated intro for this game looks amazing, but by comparison, look at the cutscenes. This really doesn't look as good as Puyo Puyo Sun. I do like how the battle sprites are set up though, with the characters in the center that play animations while they are attacking with their chains. While I'm on the topic of this game's presentation, I need to talk about this game's music. It is kick-ass. I mean, just listen to some of these tracks. Absolutely the peak of this series' music. Okay, enough other stuff. It's time to talk about the gameplay. And... Oh. Oh. What the hell happened? Why is this game so slow? Okay, this is really where this game falls flat. In an effort to keep making interesting variants on the Puyo Puyo gameplay, they made it so weird? Okay, the real new feature of this game is the super attacks. This new mechanic is basically a special move for every individual character. It was implemented by the developers as a way to help liven up the gameplay style of Puyo Puyo, as in, to give a new way to play the game compared to the previous entries in the series. Most of them have cool presentation and suit the character's abilities, but aren't exactly the most practical gameplay-wise. It's not really any surprise as to why this gameplay style never returned after this game, it's kinda just arbitrary. The Game Boy Color version's gameplay, like with its story, is not a carbon copy of the console's version. The Sun Puyo from Puyo Puyo Sun are still here, and function the same as in that game. Also, most of the super abilities are actually different here too. The Game Boy Color version also has additional playable characters who weren't playable in the console version, these being Minotauros, Honeybee, Incubus, and Lagnus. Strangely enough, they were planned to be playable in the console versions, but their role was sadly reduced to just cameos. An additional playable character in the Game Boy Color version was Pierrot, separate from Doppelganger Arl. Yeah, strangely enough, Pierrot isn't playable in the console version, only Doppelganger Arl is. Regarding the other ports of this game, well, there's the PS1 one. There's an exclusive mode called Curry Story, where you gather ingredients for curry by battling opponents, as well as an endurance battle mode where you keep fighting endless opponents until you lose or give up. Speaking of which, the Dreamcast version has an exclusive endless mode where the board is ginormous, and you can make chains that go over 100. Carbuncle will also be on the VMU. There's the N64 version, which has its own unique 4-player mode called Bomb Puyo. It's pretty much hot potato mixed with Puyo, and actually pretty fun. Kinda sad this mode never returned. The game also has transfer pack compatibility with Pocket Puyo Puyo Sun, where you can unlock extra artwork. Old game hardware and software used to be so cool. There was seemingly one more version of this game planned. To preface explaining what I mean, I need to go back to this game's art. This game had at least 4 different art styles for its promotional artwork, used between the different ports of the game. There were even more than that when you look at the other promotional material, such as this cover to an issue of Compile Club magazine. A vast majority of this art can be viewed in the Compile Gallery 2 and Compile Gallery 2 Plus discs, which for those unaware, were very cool digital archives of artwork for the Puyo Puyo and Mado Monogatari series that anyone could buy. Anyway, in the 2 Plus disc is this redrawn character artwork of the character's cutscene and super attack sprites. This artwork was never used in any port of the game, and it's speculated that it was intended for an arcade port of the game. I say speculated because I regretfully have to admit that I couldn't find a concrete source confirming this information, and while it is more than likely true due to the previous 3 main Puyo Puyo games having arcade versions, if you happen to know something said by a developer on this matter or similar, please leave a comment. Back on track, with this knowledge in mind and to wrap back to my points on development earlier, it is fair to say that Puyo Puyon almost certainly suffered a troubled development cycle, which resulted in numerous pieces of art that went unused, playable characters left on the cutting room floor, and an overall game with weird gameplay and an underwhelming story. But despite that, I still like this game a lot. Even if Puyo Puyon did not live up to its full potential, it's still an interesting Puyo game that at the very least should be looked at as a novelty of the franchise. Its art and music are absolutely both where they peaked for the Puyo Puyo series, and I can only hope future Puyo Puyo games take more notes from this game for those things. But should you play this game? If you want. Only the Dreamcast version has a fan translation patch as of the making of this video, so if you can emulate that, give this game a chance. Otherwise, the Game Boy Color version is a neat remake worth looking into if you like that system, and Bomb Puyo from the N64 version is worth trying too, I think. While this entry in the series is far from the best Puyo Puyo game, it is still pretty neat. I think I've said all that I want to say in this video, so I'll end it here. Thanks to you all for watching through this video, and I hope I'll see you again. Until then, subscribe if you haven't so you won't miss the next time I do upload. Bye!